So I am continuing with the trend of ships I want to see made into legendary versions, but with this one we're doing a bit of a twist because, frankly, the ships on this list really don't deserve the title of legendary, at least in my opinion. A lot of the ships I'm going to talk about in this video are very obscure, and some are even just original to Star Trek Online, which really doesn't fit what legendary ships are supposed to represent. They're supposed to be, the ships that were a big deal in Star Trek, either in the shows or in the movies or whatever, but these, they're just kind of there because I really want new versions of them. First up on this list is going to be the Chimera class. This ship is a Star Trek Online original that was introduced via the game's old veteran reward system. This reward system used to be linked to the game's old subscription program, but since going free to play, the only way to access this ship and the other veteran rewards is via the lifetime subscription. And that's kind of the hard part with making this ship into a legendary version. Not only is it not canon, but it was released in a unique circumstance. So the question has to be asked, if they do ever make a legendary version of this ship, how should it be released? In a legendary bundle, just like any other legendary ship, or should it be released via the lifetime sub, like the other versions of this ship? Personally, I'm more for the former than the latter, and I say that as someone who owns a lifetime sub to Star Trek Online. The problem with releasing a legendary Chimera into the lifetime subscription is that it probably won't make Cryptic any money. Let's face it, at this point in the game's life cycle, I can't imagine that they're selling a lot of lifetime subscriptions still. Whereas with a legendary bundle, we all generally go nuts for those. I know I do. But these issues aside, and the other big issue of it not being a canon ship, I really do think this ship does deserve to be a legendary ship, because this was Nog's ship. That may not be a big deal for the rest of Star Trek canon, but in Star Trek Online, Nog was a pretty big deal. And I think we should have a version of his ship that reflects that. Because, as they are, the current stats for the veteran destroyers are pretty meh. Being a destroyer with a 4-3 weapons layout and only a lieutenant commander command seat, it leaves quite a bit to be desired. Frankly, I would love to see a Miracle Worker version of this ship that would be better suited for an energy weapon build. That way it can make better use of the Phaser Lotus ability that comes with its console. Next up is the New Orleans class. Unlike the Chimera, the New Orleans actually did appear on screen in one of the TV shows. However, it only showed up for about 3 seconds, and it had a bunch of holes blown in it by the Borg. However, of the obscure Galaxy-class kit bashes that were introduced in the Wolf 359 graveyard scene, the New Orleans class is still probably the most popular among the fandom. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's the only one that has a Tier 6 version in Star Trek Online. I know the Cheyenne class is also in the game, but that doesn't have a Tier 6 version yet. Which is also the same reason why it's not on this list, but at the same time, Tier 6 Cheyenne when? Anyway, back to the New Orleans. Yes, this is a Tier 6 ship in the game, but at the same time, its stats are rather underwhelming. Being a 4-3 destroyer with only a lieutenant commander level intel seat. Frankly, I would love to see this thing get a 5-2 weapons layout as well as be bumped up to full spec. It doesn't have to be full intel, honestly you can do anything on this except probably command. I just had a horrible idea. The New Orleans is a pretty small escort class ship, and you could go full pilot ship on it. Pilot still isn't the most amazing of the specializations, but at the same time, seeing this thing do barrel rolls would be pretty amusing. And if it still had a secondary intel seat, I'd be pretty happy with it. Next up, the Baran-class Dreadnought. The Baran was a Star Trek Online original, but it is one of the ships that was based off of the ships introduced from Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, this one being based off of the Cardenas class. So while the Baran isn't canon, the Cardenas is, so it does have a canon skin on it. However, the ship never really made much of an impact, either in Star Trek Discovery or in Star Trek Online. We saw a handful of Cardenas-class ships in Discovery, the most notable of which was the USS Baran, which was Lorca's previous ship. And in Star Trek Online, the playable version of this ship never made much of an impact due to its rather underwhelming seating. While it is a command dreadnought, it has very low-level tactical seating, only having 2 lieutenant-level tactical seats. That's not enough to get a beam firing mode at max level, and the command specialization doesn't have a specialization firing mode suited for energy weapons. I've always found this to be a real shame because the Baran is a gorgeous ship, and a legendary version would be a chance to make it even more gorgeous because this ship still has yet to be revamped with the 7A hull material. This next one is probably the biggest stretch on this list. The Ba'ul Sentry ship. Yes, it's canon, but the Ba'ul have hardly made a significant impact on Star Trek compared to other alien species. And with Star Trek Discovery going into its final season later this year, I doubt they'll have the chance to. You guys know how much I like the Ba'ul stuff in Star Trek Online. Sentry mode is one of my favorite consoles, and I love the Ba'ul anti-proton beams for their refraction ability. But there is one thing that we don't have. Ba'ul fighter pets. And these are canon. In Discovery's Season 2 finale, a group of Kelpians show up in Baul fighters to join the fight against Control. But when the Sentry ship was introduced into Star Trek Online, it didn't have a hangar bay because they made it a spearhead, so thus it didn't have hangar pets. I'm guessing they finished working on that ship before that episode finally aired. So my suggestion is to make a Baul Sentry ship that is a science dreadnought or a multi-mission science vessel. Preferably science dreadnought. It's fitting, that ship is huge. But to be honest here, my interest is more in getting Baul fighter hangar pets than it is an actual legendary version of the Sentry ship. Because I really want fighter pets with Baul anti-proton weapons. Give the base versions a beam array and a torpedo, add pulse cannons onto the very rare versions, then give the ultra rare versions the 2-piece bonus from the Lobi set, so they can get the extra refraction out of their Baul weapons. Just don't give them a firing mode, that's what superior area denial's for. Moving on, next is the Moog. Like with the Baran, this one's really just here because I think it looks cool, and I would like a better version of it. Of the Star Trek Online original ships for the KDF, I always thought this was one of the coolest looking. It's a mid-sized battlecruiser with clear callbacks to previous Klingon battlecruisers, having that signature head, long neck, then body layout. Well, it's clearly meant to be a bit beefier than, say, the D7 or the Vorcha. However, this is a Star Trek Online original, and therefore it is not canon. And even within Star Trek Online, the ship is often overshadowed by its two counterparts. The Federation counterpart to this ship was the Avenger, and then once they got T6 versions, the Romulan counterpart was the Mogai, meaning the Tier 6 versions of all three of these ships had emergency weapon cycle, which made them rather popular, but more so the other two, especially once all ships were able to be flown across factions. So while I would really love to see a legendary version of the Moog, even I have to ask, what's the point of it? Because it shares a similar console set with the Avenger, and the Starship trait of the Tier 6 version was re-released on both the Legendary Avenger and the Legendary Valdor. The Tier 5 console is a little bit different than the one off the Avenger. Functionally, it's pretty much the same, it just has different individual abilities. But actually, the Moog's version isn't even a 3-piece because there was no KDF version of the Inquiry. So a Legendary Moog would actually be even less of a value if you're just looking at consoles and traits. But I still want one, because the Moog is a cool looking ship, and I want one with better seating. Because the existing T6 version only has a Lieutenant Commander Intel seat. I think it would be neat if they did kind of the inverse of what they did with the Legendary Avenger. Still make it a 5-3 battlecruiser, but make it a full Intel ship with a secondary Miracle Worker seat. Next up is the Hapax Warbird. Of all the ones on this list, this is probably the one I would want the most, because the Hapax is a really cool and really underappreciated ship. At least when you judge it from the perspective of looking at every single variant of it. So the actual legacy of this ship is a little weird. The original version of the Hapax was introduced with Legacy of Romulus. It was just the Tier 5 cruiser for the Romulan faction that you obtained by leveling up your character. But the really interesting thing about the ship is that it was clearly designed to be able to separate. Because while the Hapax was the Tier 5 cruiser for the Romulans, its science and escort ship counterparts were clearly just the top and bottom halves of this ship. However, if you had the C-Store version of the Hapax, you could actually make this into an actual function of the ship, because the Hakona Advanced Warbird, which was the C-Store version, it had a console called Dual Vector Separation, which allowed the ship to separate into two parts. The cool part was that this wasn't like the saucer separation off the Galaxy or Odyssey class. Dual Vector Separation lets you pick which section of the ship you want to actually play as, so it actually functions a lot more like Multi-Vector Assault mode off the Prometheus. But with this one you only get 2 options for the separation instead of 3. Now the Hakona itself was never particularly impressive because as a warbird it was basically just a generic cruiser. It just had a neat console on it. But when the Tier 6 version came out, they did something a little more interesting with it. Because for the Tier 6 version, the Kara Advanced Warbird, they made that one the Romulan counterpart to the Galaxy Dreadnought. So the Tier 6 version being a Dreadnought meant it gained a hangar bay and a spinal lance, making it much more interesting. However, the ship still only had a 4-4 weapons layout and only a Lieutenant Commander command seat. So it really hasn't aged all that well in comparison to modern ships. So what I would love to see from a legendary version is, 1, obviously, give it a 5-3 weapons layout. Come on, look at that wingspan. This thing has to have a 5-3 layout. Give it a different specialization, something more well-suited to energy weapon builds so it can synchronize better with the Spinal Lance. So Miracle Worker or Intel, heck, even Temporal would be better. And I hate to say this again, but actually Pilot kind of works for the secondary seat, because it actually works really thematically with the separation console. But at least make it a Lieutenant Commander pilot seat. I want to use reinforcement squadrons on something. Actually, another idea I want to point out is don't release it as a legendary ship, but release it as a whole new ship, like, something akin to the anniversary ships. Because one thing I'd actually like to see is a new console, or rather a new version of an existing console. Because the whole point of the Dual Vector Separation console is that that ship was basically designed from what the Romulans learned after they stole the Prometheus. So it was literally meant to be their version of multi-vector assault mode. So continue with the theme of Romulans stealing stuff from the Prometheus and give us a plasma version of the Hydra console. Because I really like that console, but I would love to see more versions of it in different damage types, because the existing version is only in Phaser, and Phaser's already crazy overpowered. I mean, Plasma kind of is too, ever since Complex Plasma Fires came out, but still. But yeah, Legendary Hapax or some sort of re-release of the Hapax, I think this could be really cool because I think this is a really cool ship with some really neat features on it. Especially since some of these features have actually gotten pretty decent improvements in recent years. Like, I talked about the Hydra, its console and its Starship trait actually make those separation consoles more effective, and there's the trait off the Shrike, which gives you the ability to lower the cooldown of innate weapons on ships, which would include Spinal Lances. Okay, and the last ship on this list is going to be here just because I know if I don't put it here, all of you are going to yell at me. The Atlas Prototype Dreadnought. Now, we all know the reason why everyone wants a Legendary Atlas, because we all want an account unlock for the DPRM, which has been widely regarded as one of the best consoles in the game ever since it was introduced in January of 2017. But frankly, I feel like this ship is much better suited for a Mud's Market bundle, which, hear me out before you tear off my head. When this ship was introduced into the lockboxes, it was introduced in a choice pack inside the lockbox, along with the other two TOS Dreadnoughts, those being the D9 and the Threy. So if they put the Atlas in a Mud's Market ship bundle, then they would also have to add its Klingon and Romulan counterparts, and they would all be listed under one choice within that Mud's Market bundle. It was like this with the Kelvin bundle, with the Kelvin Constitution Cruiser, the D4X, and the Threy. Same with the Cruiserweight bundle, where you can get the TOS Constitution, the original D7, and the Talaru all in one choice pack. So if the Atlas was put into a Mud's Market bundle, you would get it and its two counterparts, so you'd get 3 of the 4 pieces for its console set, the 4th one being on the NX refit. A Legendary Atlas wouldn't come with the full console set, it would only have the DPRM. And plus there's also the fact that the Atlas is another relatively obscure Star Trek Online original. I mean, the only reason most people give a crap about this ship is because of the console, because the actual stats on the Atlas are actually pretty underwhelming. Not being full spec and only having a Lieutenant Commander temporal seat and Lieutenant level command seat. And that temporal seat is on the tactical seat, so you're going to have to compromise between the abilities from both those schools. The only upside to the Atlas is that it has a 5-3 weapons layout. So this would be one of the upsides to a Legendary Atlas, an opportunity for better seating, as always. It always seems to come down to that kind of stuff, doesn't it? I always want either better seating or a better weapons layout, and I don't really know why either is such a big ask. Because seriously, 4-4 weapons layouts have no place in the game anymore. Or 4-3 if we're talking escorts. Another cool reason to introduce a Legendary Atlas is because that Legendary ships always come with a new skin. And, well, the Atlas is already a TOS ship, so what comes after that? TMP era ships. Can you imagine a TMP era version of the Atlas? I think that would look super cool. Honestly, that alone is all the reason I need to want a Legendary Atlas. So yeah, that is 7 more ships that I really want to see made into Legendary versions, even though they probably don't qualify for the title. Some of these, I think, could possibly happen because, I mean, they're going to have to stretch out the definition of what qualifies for a Legendary ship as we go on in Star Trek Online because, you know, there are only so many ships that appeared in the shows and movies. But it's also very likely that most, or if not all of these, probably won't be made into Legendaries. Though that's not going to stop me from hoping and wishing and begging. So yeah, what are some ships that you want to see made into Legendaries that probably don't deserve the title? Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Again, all the usual outro stuff. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.